This forest had been my favorite place since childhood. The old trails, the familiar trees, the damp smell after the rain. Even as an adult, I sometimes came here just to think, to be alone. That evening, I decided to go a little further than usual. I needed to clear my mind after a long, stressful week. Work had been exhausting, and my head felt like a pressure cooker. The forest had always helped, so I grabbed my jacket, slipped my phone into my pocket, and took a bottle of water. The sun hadn't set yet, but the evening light was already casting a dull golden hue over the trees. I walked at a steady pace, following a familiar trail. The sounds of distant birds and rustling leaves filled the air. The further I went, the quieter it became. It was something I always liked about this place, complete solitude. No cars, no people talking, just the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. About 30 minutes in, I reached a clearing with a nice view. I'd stopped here many times before, usually sitting on a fallen log, listening to the wind moving through the trees. But as I scanned the area, something caught my eye, a black backpack lying a few meters away near an old tree. I frowned. This wasn't a common spot for hikers. Most people stuck to the main trail, and this was a bit off the usual path. The bag looked fairly new, black with yellow stripes. A slight unease crept over me. I hesitated for a moment, then walked closer. Maybe someone had forgotten it? Maybe it belonged to a camper who had set up somewhere nearby. I stopped just in front of it and crouched down. The zippers were slightly open. I could see a water bottle inside, a pocket knife, a pack of biscuits, a phone. It was turned off. I reached out but hesitated. Something about it felt off. It wasn't abandoned in a hurry. Everything was neatly packed inside. There were no signs of struggle, no scattered belongings. It looked like someone had deliberately set it down and left. And then I heard it, a faint crunch of a twig. Behind me, I felt a sharp chill crawl up my spine. Slowly, I straightened up and turned my head. A man stood about 10 meters away, partially hidden between the trees. At first glance, he looked ordinary, jacket, jeans, beanie. A little scruffy, but nothing alarming. But there was something unsettling about how still he was. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring straight at me. My throat went dry. "Hey," I said cautiously. "Is this your backpack?" Silence. He didn't react. I swallowed hard. Maybe he hadn't heard me? I took a small step back. "Sorry if I touched your stuff," I added. "I was just checking if someone left it behind." Still no response. He was just watching me. And then I noticed something, his hand. At first, I thought it was just dirt, but as I looked closer, I saw it clearly. His fingers, his palm, even the sleeve of his jacket were smeared in something dark, something red. My pulse spiked. I took another step back. My body screamed at me to leave, to turn around and walk away, but I forced myself to stay calm. Running would only make things worse. "All right," I said, raising my hand slightly. "I'll just be on my way." He tilted his head slightly, as if he were studying me. Then, without a word, he took a step forward. I turned and walked quickly in the opposite direction, forcing myself not to break into a run. Every step felt heavier. The trees around me seemed to press closer. Then I heard his footsteps behind me. He was following me. I picked up my pace. My ears were ringing. My breathing grew shallower. "Keep walking. Just keep walking." But the footsteps behind me grew faster. That was it. I ran. The branches tore my clothes as I pushed forward. My feet pounded against the dirt path, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. I didn't dare look back. I could hear him running too. I wasn't imagining it. He was chasing me. I had no plan, no direction, just one goal. Get to the road. If I could reach it, someone might drive by. There were rarely cars this late, but I had to take my chances. I pushed my legs harder, my lungs burning. The trees blurred around me. My phone. I needed to call for help. I fumbled in my pocket as I ran, my fingers shaking as I tried to unlock it. No signal. Of course. But I wasn't stopping. The ground sloped downward. I stumbled but caught myself just in time. My legs were screaming, my chest tight with exhaustion. And then light. The road. I burst out of the tree line and nearly collapsed onto the pavement. I turned back. Silence. The forest stood still, dark, Empty. No man. No sound of footsteps. I swallowed hard, scanning the trees, my body still trembling with adrenaline. Had I imagined it? Had I panicked over nothing? No. He was real. I pulled out my phone again, still gasping for breath, and dialed the police. It took me 3 tries to get my fingers steady enough to press the right numbers. 20 minutes later, a patrol car arrived. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions neutral, but mildly concerned. I told them everything. They checked the clearing. The backpack was still there. They searched the nearby area, but found no one. One of the officers asked me to describe the man again. I did. His expression barely changed. Then he glanced at his partner and said something under his breath. I caught only part of it. Matches the description. I tensed. Matches what description? I asked. The officer hesitated. Then he sighed. A missing person. A hiker. Reported lost 3 days ago. My mouth went dry. Was he? They didn't answer right away. Then the second officer finally spoke. They found his body earlier today. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Where? About 10 kilometers from here. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, I forced out the question I didn't want to ask. When did he die? The officer hesitated again. Then, in a careful voice, he said, 2 days ago. I didn't say anything. I didn't sleep that night. I still don't know who or what I saw in that forest. But I do know one thing. The man who chased me wasn't alive. I worked as a ranger in a remote national park. The place was so wild and isolated that few people ever ventured there, except for hunters or people like me who were responsible for maintaining the area. My job involved monitoring the state of nature, preventing fires, and ensuring that tourists didn't get lost. But one event changed my perception of this seemingly peaceful forest. One day, after receiving a report of a missing tourist, my partner and I set out to search for him. According to his friends, he had fallen behind the group during a mountain ascent and never returned. Usually, these cases ended with the person simply getting lost and waiting for help. But this time it was different. We searched the forest for 3 days. His chances of survival were dwindling rapidly. However, on the 3rd day, we stumbled upon his campsite. The fire had long since burned out, food was scattered around, and his backpack lay on the ground as if someone had rummaged through it. There were no signs of struggle, but it seemed like he had left the site in a great hurry. We called his name, but only silence answered. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. They were quiet but distinctly audible on the damp ground. My heart clenched with fear when I realized they didn't belong to my partner. We turned in the direction of the sound, but saw nothing. It felt as if someone was watching us, but whatever it was, it remained hidden. The trees were dense, and sunlight barely penetrated the branches, casting eerie shadows. Then, we noticed strange markings on a tree. They looked like carved symbols or even schematic figures of people. But what terrified me the most was that they were fresh. Someone or something had carved them recently. Feeling an urgent need to leave, we returned to the base to request additional support. But before leaving, I glanced back once more and saw a silhouette among the trees. It stood motionless, staring directly at me. I blinked, and it was gone. The search continued for several more days, but the tourist was never found. His disappearance remained an unsolved mystery, and I resigned a few months later. Now, I avoid that forest, because whatever is there is still waiting for the next person to get lost. Years later, I accidentally came across a police report mentioning similar disappearances in that same forest. One story in particular struck me. Decades ago, a group of hunters vanished there, and the only trace of their presence was those same carved symbols on the trees. Some who tried to decipher them claimed they were in ancient language, possibly even ritualistic signs. The question haunted me. Was the silhouette I saw really a person? If so, why was he hiding? And if not, then what exactly is stalking people in that forest? A year after I resigned, I heard about another disappearance. It was a lone traveler. His tracks ended near the same place where we had last seen traces of the first missing person. Once again, the police found nothing. Over time, I became more interested in the history of the forest. It turned out that people had disappeared there for centuries, and most cases remained unsolved. Some local elders spoke of ancient legends mentioning something that lived among the trees, something that didn't like outsiders trespassing in its domain. I reached out to a former ranger who had worked there in the 1980s. His story unsettled me even more. He told me that he had found those same symbols on trees multiple times, but whenever he returned the next day, they were gone. Once, he even discovered pieces of clothing on the ground, seemingly torn apart by claws. The police found no evidence of foul play, but he quit his job shortly after that. The final straw for me came a few months ago. I received an anonymous letter with only one sentence. You saw it, and it remembers you. There was no return address, and I had no idea who sent it. But now, I live with the feeling that someone or something is still watching me. Something is wrong with that forest. And one thing I know for sure, I will never go back there again. I've always loved walking through the forest, especially at night. It gave me a sense of peace and freedom, as if I were part of something greater. In those moments, I could forget everything that troubled me during the day: university, work, small problems. The forest became my refuge. I often walked through it after work or on free evenings, sometimes spending hours there. This time, I decided to take a shortcut home through the woods. It was my usual route, a familiar path I had walked thousands of times. The evening was cool but windless, and the sky was clear, with only a few stars barely visible through the darkness. I stepped into the forest without a second thought, not considering any dangers. But this time, something felt different. At first, I didn't pay attention, but then I realized something was off. The forest was completely silent. Normally, even at night, there were sounds of animals, rustling leaves, the hoot of an owl, the occasional chirping of nocturnal birds. But this time, there was nothing. Just my own breathing and footsteps echoing in the stillness. I stopped, glancing around, trying to figure out why everything felt so empty. The sense of void struck me. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination and kept walking, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave. Maybe I was just tired after a long day, but with each step deeper into the forest, my heart began to beat faster. I recognized the bushes overgrowing the path, a reminder of how often I had walked here. But why did everything feel so strange now? Suddenly, I heard something that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. A sound, quiet, barely audible, like someone was walking behind me. I turned around. For a split second, I thought I saw a silhouette emerging from the darkness, but I couldn't make out anything clearly. The forest was so dense that the shadows swallowed even the faintest forms. Maybe it was just a trick of the light? Or was my mind playing games with me? I kept moving, trying to ignore the strange feeling. But as I looked ahead, something felt wrong. The end of the forest, which should have been close, seemed much farther than usual. Then I heard a soft chuckle. At first, it blended with the wind through the leaves, but then it became distinct. Someone was laughing, quiet, almost amused, yet distant. I turned around quickly, but again, there was nothing. The darkness was too thick to make out anything. The wind grew colder, and the laughter seemed closer. My hands started trembling, though I tried to keep calm. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just my imagination. I picked up my pace, determined to reach the edge of the forest where the streetlights would bring some comfort. But every step I took, I felt someone getting closer. Then I saw him. A man. He stood directly in the middle of the path. Tall, dressed in dark clothing, his face hidden beneath a hood. I stopped, unsure of what to do. My mind couldn't process why he was just standing there, motionless. He wasn't an ordinary passerby. There was something off about him. His presence felt heavy and menacing. I tried to speak, but no words left my mouth. My mind was frozen, my body unwilling to move. He seemed to sense my fear. Slowly, he tilted his head and whispered, "You can't run." Those words, calm and precise, sent a new wave of terror through me. I stumbled backward before turning and running as fast as I could. I didn't care about the burning in my legs or the pounding in my chest. I just had to get out. The forest felt endless, and the laughter was back. It was louder now, closer, chasing me. My eyes searched desperately for the way out, but everything seemed darker, more twisted. Finally, I saw it. The road, the streetlights, safety. I sprinted toward it, my lungs screaming for air, my legs about to give out. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. When I reached my house, my phone rang. I don't remember when it started ringing, but the voice on the other end was calm, almost casual. "You made it home okay? Didn't you?" I froze. It was him, the man from the forest. My body went numb. I didn't answer. I just hung up. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about that man, that laughter, the way the forest felt wrong. I used to think of the forest as just a place, a shortcut, a familiar route. But now I know the truth. Something is in there. Something watches. Something follows. And now it knows me.